I didn't ask to kill. I didn't ask to be born in this uniform, to feel the rough leather of the boot brush against my ankle, to feel the sweat soaking through the fabric as the siren starts screaming in the early morning. I swear to Allah, if I had my way, I would still be at home, lying next to my daughter, telling her stories about heroes who conquer monsters, not turning into the monster she will fear in the future. When the war came to my neighborhood, it didn't knock on the door asking for permission. It blew up the street, destroyed the walls, cracked the ceiling of my kitchen. My wife screamed, my daughter clung to my arm, and I was swallowed up by a single certainty. Either I fought or they died. So I enlisted. What choice did I have? Here in Iran, war doesn't ask if you want it. It commands. I was thrown into a truck, along with other young men who were shaking with fear. Some were crying, others were squeezing the rosary beads between their fingers until their skin hurt. The sergeant didn't even look at our faces. He repeated like a trained animal that our destiny was to protect the country, defend our honor, and restore our dignity. I tried to believe this, but with every kilometer we got away from my home, fear ate away at me. At the training camp, they ripped away my identity. They started calling me Soldier 173. There was no name, no family, no past. The past was a risk, they told me. A man who thinks about home can't pull the trigger, so I had to stop thinking. I had to obey. But I thought a lot. I thought about my daughter asking why her school had been destroyed. I thought about the milk missing from the fridge, the fear in my wife's eyes as the explosions got closer. I wanted to protect. I wanted to fight. But I also wanted to come back alive. On the first night of training, they made us sleep on the hard floor, without blankets or water. The sergeant stepped among us and shouted that anyone who complained would be sent away in a black bag. I didn't say a word. I could smell the fear of my comrades, that acidic, heavy smell that fills your nostrils and never leaves. 2 days later, they gave us the weapons, a grey, worn, heavy rifle. When I held it for the first time, my hands shook. I thought, I'm not a murderer. But all it took was hearing the bombs falling a few kilometers away to understand that if I wasn't the one to shoot, someone else would shoot at me. They taught us to shoot at the human form, a target painted with vague outlines of eyes, nose, mouth. Every time we hit the center, the instructor would smile, satisfied, and shout, "Kill quickly. He who hesitates dies." I felt my soul shattering with each shot. The nights were hell. I would huddle in the corner, trying not to cry, because if anyone saw my tears, they would mock me. A soldier who cries, they said, is fresh meat for the enemy. But sometimes I couldn't take it anymore. I would cry softly, muffled, remembering my daughter's small hands hugging me, asking if I would come back. I promised I would. But there, surrounded by men hungry for revenge, I realized that promises are worthless in war. On the 10th day, we were finally given the order, go to the front line. Fear turned into panic. I saw some comrades vomiting, others praying, others simply paralyzed, staring into space. I just held my rifle as if it were a talisman, mentally repeating my family name so as not to forget who I was. We climbed into old trucks, swaying along the bumpy road, heading into the unknown. The smell of gunpowder already reached us before we even reached our destination. The sky was grey, as if even the sun was ashamed to look at us. I noticed that my hands were shaking non-stop, even though I tried to control them. I thought, will I have the courage to shoot another human being? The sergeant shouted orders to keep us on our feet, but I could see in his eyes that he was also afraid. War destroys everyone, even those who think they dominate the field. On the way, we passed through devastated villages. Houses turned into rubble, women screaming, children covered in dust and blood. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, but it was no use. The voices stuck in my mind. They told me that those villages were risk areas and that civilians could die in the crossfire. But what was the fault of those children? What was the fault of that old man with the white beard crying over his grandson's body? When we arrived at the outpost, a deathly silence fell over everyone. It was like arriving in a hospital hallway knowing that someone was going to die. You just don't know who. We were positioned in makeshift trenches with sandbags and cans of gasoline, and the order was clear: shoot first, ask questions later. I held my rifle and felt the weight not only of the iron, but of my conscience. What if I missed? What if I hit an innocent person? I was no hero. I was just an ordinary man, thrown into a rotten game of interests that I never fully understood. That night I couldn't sleep. The first explosion happened at 3 in the morning. The earth shook. I heard men screaming. I heard death approaching, and I knew that my true baptism of fire was beginning. In war, no one returns the same, and I already felt that with each passing second, I was leaving behind the little bit of humanity that still remained within me. As they moved us, I had to step over bodies. Some were still moaning, asking for help. I forced myself to look straight ahead, to feel nothing, because if I did, I would collapse. I stepped over a boy who must have been my age, his face covered in dust and tears, trying to hold back the entrails that were leaking from his belly. He grabbed my arm, begging, "Help, please." I hesitated, but the sergeant shouted to keep going, that there was no time, that the wounded would be picked up later. I wrenched my arm from his grasp, feeling as if I were leaving my own brother to die. At that moment I understood that war turns us into monsters. We marched to the junction, taking up position in another makeshift trench. I was exhausted, my head throbbing, and I couldn't wash away the dried blood that clung to my neck. The taste of metal wouldn't leave my mouth. A companion, Razor, approached and whispered, "I can't take it anymore, brother. I want to leave." "Me too," I replied, almost in a whisper, because if I spoke loudly I might start crying. But there was no escape. Anyone who tried to desert would be shot on sight, and we knew that. So we stayed there, buried in the mud, waiting for the next attack. That night, Razor killed himself. He put the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger without thinking twice. The sound echoed so close to me that I felt my eardrum crack. The sergeant came running, kicked his body and cursed cowards, but all I could do was stare at the hole in my friend's temple and think, perhaps he has found the only possible escape. Then they collected his body like it was garbage. They threw it in a corner, covered it with a black bag, and that was it. No one spoke of Razor anymore. No one prayed for him. There was no time for mourning on the front lines. I tried to sleep a few hours later, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face plastered with the bullet wound, asking myself why I didn't stop him. In that trench, I realized that the war would swallow me sooner or later. It could be a bullet, a grenade, or simply madness, but I would not come out intact. I already knew that. When the new attack began, late that morning, I didn't even have time to pray. The glare of the explosions illuminated our faces, and I thought for a second that maybe it was my time to die. But it wasn't. Not yet. I was doomed to survive, and that, at that moment, seemed worse than death. By the third morning of the fire, I could no longer feel my legs. It was as if my body had turned off the pain to save energy. The earth shook with each explosion, and the air grew heavier by the minute, suffocating, laden with soot and screams. I felt trapped inside myself, like an animal trapped in a hole. During that attack, we were surrounded by enemy troops who had sneaked up on us during the night. When we realized it, they were already upon us, grenades flying over our post, shattering sandbags, and throwing pieces of men into the air. I saw a young man's body being thrown, hitting a concrete wall and falling limp, like a lifeless doll. His brains ran down his temple, a dark red trickle dripping slowly, as if time had stopped. The sergeant was shouting and shooting like crazy, but there was no organization whatsoever. It was pure chaos. I tried to aim, but my hands were shaking so much that I couldn't even see the target properly. The constant glare blinded me, and everything seemed to spin around me. In the midst of the confusion, I felt a thud on my shoulder. A piece of shrapnel had hit me. The pain was sharp, tearing, and a bitter taste rose in my throat. I almost dropped the gun, but my instincts screamed, "Survive!" So I crawled to a protected corner, trying to stop the bleeding. The trench had become a death trap. We ran out of ammunition, and reinforcements were not arriving. I could see my comrades yelling for refills, throwing rocks when they ran out of bullets, like children fighting on the playground. This was not war. It was carnage. Suddenly, an even brighter flash threw me to the ground, deafening me. When I managed to open my eyes, I noticed men dressed in enemy uniforms surrounding us, shouting in Farsi and pushing us with rifle butts. I didn't have time to think about anything. I was dragged out of the trench, thrown to the ground, with my hands tied behind my head. We were prisoners. The humiliation burned brighter than the wound in my shoulder. I didn't want to give up, but I had no choice. A young man next to me tried to fight back, but he was shot in the forehead without any ceremony. His blood splashed onto my face, hot, alive, reminding me that I was still breathing, but for how long? They lined us up in the makeshift courtyard of a destroyed building. We were treated like dogs, kicked, cursed, searched. They ripped off our identification tags, took our few belongings, and laughed when some soldiers cried in fear. I felt hate, a lot of hate, but I also felt a sick relief. At least for now, I didn't have to shoot anyone. I was a hostage, but I was still alive. They locked us in a fetid, damp basement that smelled of mold and urine. There were more than 20 of us, crammed together like sacks of potatoes, sharing the little air that came in through a high grate. I huddled in a corner, pressing my injured shoulder, praying it wouldn't get infected. There was no doctor, no medicine, nothing but our desperation. A boy, maybe 17, was trembling beside me, softly repeating his mother's name. I wanted to comfort him, but I couldn't say a word. I wanted to scream my daughter's name, my wife's name, my father's name, but I knew that if I did, I would break inside. So I kept quiet. The guards came from time to time, humiliated us, threw scraps of bread on the floor as if they were feeding pigs. Some of them were beaten for nothing, just to set an example. A soldier next to me lost his teeth with a blow from the butt of his gun. He spat blood and cried silently. There, I realized there were no heroes, only survivors. The first morning in captivity, I had a fever. The shrapnel that had hit me was inflaming. I felt my skin burning, throbbing, as if there was fire circulating in my blood. I trembled so much that I thought I would die of infection before any execution. I tried to pull the piece of metal out myself, using the dull blade on my belt. It was torture, but I managed to pull it out, tearing the flesh even more. I bit my arm to keep from screaming and attracting the attention of the guards. Hot blood gushed out, making me dizzy, but I managed to throw the shard away, like someone exorcising a demon. I almost fainted, but I took a deep breath and made a makeshift bandage with a piece of my torn shirt. There, on the filthy floor, I realized I couldn't die there. I had to go back. For her. For my daughter. The next day, they took us out of the cellar and lined us up again in the courtyard. An enemy commander appeared, looking at each face as if choosing cattle at the market. He spoke calmly, almost politely, but he threatened to kill us if we tried to escape or conspire against them. Some tried to argue, saying that they were just recruits, that it wasn't their fault. The commander didn't even blink. He gave the order to shoot one of them, at point-blank range. The sound was sharp, direct, and we all immediately shut up. The message was clear: obey or die. I felt my stomach churn every time a guard walked by, ready to hit someone, to curse, to humiliate. We no longer had any pride, only fear. Pure fear, which held us back at every move, fear that made us pray even to those who didn't believe in God. But in the midst of that terror, one thought kept me alive. I need to escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my daughter's face, smiling in my memory. I could not be buried in that forgotten place, turned into a war statistic. I had to get out of there, no matter what the cost. On the last night, before we started planning anything, I heard one of the guards say that we were going to be transferred to another location, even further away, where no one came back. My blood ran cold. I couldn't allow it. If I wanted to survive, I had to try something, and fast. That night, lying on the cold floor, I went over every detail of what I had heard from the guard. We were going to be taken to another prison, even further away, where prisoners simply disappeared. My entire body froze just thinking about it. I knew that if I didn't escape now, I would never see my family again. Fear became my fuel. While everyone around me dozed off, exhausted, I kept my eyes open, studying every crack in that filthy cell, every loose nail in the wood, every movement of the guards. I clung to the smallest hope, because giving up was not an option. At dawn, one of the boys, a soldier named Farid, noticed that I was awake and came closer, whispering, barely moving his lips, "Are you thinking the same thing as me?" I nodded. He took a deep breath and looked at the ground as if gathering courage. "If we get transferred, we're dead. We need to try something now." We looked at the others, who were sleeping soundly, and then we whispered our plan, quick and full of flaws. But it was all we had. A loose nail, a broken iron bar, a rusty corner of the fence. Small clues that might give us some chance of escape. Farid had experience in metalworking, and said that before becoming a soldier, he helped his father repair fences and gates. He studied the lock on the improvised basement door and said confidently, "I can force it if I have a few minutes." I agreed right away. Between trying and dying on my knees, I preferred the first option. We spent the rest of the night pretending to sleep, but with our senses on high alert. Each step on guard made us tense, ready to feign sleep. My heart was beating so hard that I feared someone could hear it even inside my chest. When silence finally fell, near dawn, Farid began working on the lock. He forced the iron bar with the nail, making tiny movements so as not to attract attention. I knelt beside him, ready to help at any sign of noise. The sound of the iron creaking was terrifying. Each crack sounded like thunder in that place. But the lock gave way, inch by inch, until we heard a muffled click. The door opened like the mouth of a hungry monster. Outside, the courtyard was just beginning to lighten. There were still guards patrolling, but fewer than during the day. I knew we had seconds at most. "Go now," I whispered. We crawled like rats, passing through the rubble and debris. I could feel my shoulder throbbing, the wound still raw, but I didn't care. Every step was a victory against death. We came to a side hallway, where a guard was dozing against the wall. His rifle was propped on his knee, his head lolling to the side. My blood ran cold, because if he woke up, we would be finished. Farid motioned for me to stay still, then moved forward, silent as a cat, until he was behind the sleeping soldier. He gripped the man's neck tightly, muffling any screams. The guard struggled for a few seconds, then passed out, limp and unconscious. We grabbed his gun, our hands still shaking. I had never felt so alive and so desperate. We continued forward, skirting the destroyed warehouses, looking for a way out of that damned complex. I thought about my daughter's face, her eyes shining with pride, if I came back alive. That gave me strength. When we reached a side gate, we saw 2 watchtowers. We would have to run through. My heart was racing, but there was no alternative. Farid looked at me and whispered, "We run together. If they scream, we won't stop. Got it?" I understood. The moment we jumped over the gate, it seemed like the whole world woke up. The sound of metal clanging, the alarm echoing through the halls, voices shouting orders. I ran like I had never run before. My lungs burned, my legs gave out, but I didn't stop. I heard gunshots flying past me, the sound cutting through the air. Farid stumbled, almost falling, but I grabbed his arm and we continued on, into the dense forest that surrounded the prison camp. We dived into the dense vegetation, scratching ourselves on the dry branches without looking back. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away until all we could hear was our own heavy breathing. We stayed there, hidden, for hours. The day dawned and then fell again, and we didn't move. I could feel ants crawling up my leg, biting my skin, but I didn't dare react. Fear kept us still. On the second day, we ventured out on a hike. We followed a stream, drinking muddy water, eating leaves and roots, anything that would give us energy. I could feel my fever coming back, but I forced myself to keep going. I thought about my daughter with every step. I thought about her smile, the way she called me a hero. I couldn't die, not here, not like that. Farid spoke little, but every word was a pact for survival. He reminded me that there were two of us, that we could not abandon each other. That gave me courage. We walked aimlessly until we reached an abandoned village with destroyed houses, fallen roofs, ghosts of what was once life. We hid in a basement covered in rubble, praying not to be discovered. There, for the first time in days, we managed to sleep a few hours. The sleep came heavy, cruel, full of nightmares. I saw the war again. I saw Ali dying, Reza killing himself, the blood, the screams. Everything played in my head like a macabre film. I woke up shivering in a cold sweat, but alive. That was already a miracle. Farid looked at me and said firmly, "From here we go to the border. We will leave Iran at all costs." I wasn't sure if it was possible, but I had to believe. I had to keep my promise to my daughter. Deep down, I knew that the war would not let me go easily, but as long as I breathed, I would fight to get out of that hell. We stayed in that ghost town for 2 days, trying to gather strength. Food was non-existent. We survived by chewing on pieces of stale bread we found in a fallen cupboard, drinking water from a muddy puddle that looked more like mud than water. But it was either that or die of thirst. With every noise, every echo of footsteps, I felt my heart jump, ready to explode. Fear consumed us so much that it caused cramps in my chest. Farid tried to calm me down, but I saw in his eyes the same terror that dominated me. On the third night, he pointed to a crumpled map, scribbled on in red pen, "We have to get here. It's a road that leads to the border. If we cross, we can find shelter on the other side." I didn't even know who would be waiting for us there. I didn't trust anyone, to tell the truth. But that line drawn on the paper seemed like the only chance I would ever have to see my daughter again. We set off before dawn. The icy wind bit into our faces, and the dust blinded us. The landscape was pure despair. Burned houses, destroyed fields, starving children who looked at us as if we were monsters. And deep down we were. 2 armed men, covered in dried blood, looking like beasts on the verge of death. I tried to offer some of the bread I was carrying to a little girl, but her mother pulled her back, terrified. My heart broke. Maybe it was for the best. We followed back roads, dodging patrols, sleeping in crumbling sheds. I could feel my body giving out. The wound was festering again, throbbing so hard it was making me delirious. One night, I woke up screaming my daughter's name. Farid covered my mouth with his hand, shaking me. "Want to die?" "Shut up." He was right. But the longing burned like acid inside his chest. On the 4th day of our walk, we came across a military convoy blocking the main road. Soldiers, men trained to shoot first and ask questions later. There was no way through. I froze from head to toe. "And now?" I asked, desperate. "Through the fields, these Farid. Let's cross through the inside. It's riskier, but no one expects fugitives there." It was a swamp of mud and tall grass. Each step sank up to our shins, chilling us to the bone. Mosquitoes devoured us, and our boots began to disintegrate in the dirty water. But we kept going. We walked for hours, until the vegetation opened and we saw in the distance the border fence. It looked like a mirage, a rectangle of barbed wire separating our death from any hope. My chest burst with hope, but it was short-lived. Floodlights swept the area, and surveillance towers pointed in every direction. There were armed men, sniffer dogs, a veritable siege. "Farid, we will never pass," I whispered, feeling my legs weaken. "We are going, yes," he replied, "even if it's crawling." He had a courage that I envied, a suicidal stubbornness that was perhaps the only way to survive. We waited for nightfall. The wind was chilly, the sky moonless, perfect for hiding. Farid tied pieces of cloth around his arms and legs to muffle any glare from exposed skin. I did the same. We began to crawl, inch by inch, until we reached the fence. The barbed wire gleamed menacingly, but it seemed almost a blessing compared to everything we had faced. Suddenly, a bark cut through the silence. One of the dogs had scented us. It began barking, pulling on its leash. The soldiers turned, shining their flashlights. I froze. Fear seized my lungs. I felt the pee involuntarily drip down my leg. Farid threw himself in front of me, shouting, "Run! I'll hold them!" He stood up, throwing himself at the lights in a desperate gesture. I wanted to pull him away, to stop him, but he shouted again, "Go! For the love of God, go!" I ran like I had never run before in my life. The sound of gunshots echoed behind me, screams, dogs, explosions, all mixed together. I felt splinters tearing my arm as I passed through the fence, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. When I threw myself on the other side, I rolled down a cliff and landed in an open field. The pain overcame me and I passed out. When I woke up, it was daylight. I was alive, alone, but alive. Farid wasn't with me. I didn't have the courage to go back and get him. The echo of the shots was still in my head, like a ghost haunting me. I staggered to my feet, clutching my torn arm, and took my first steps on foreign soil. I had crossed the border. But at what price? Farid had sacrificed himself for me. That sacrifice tore me apart inside. I felt like a traitor for leaving him, but at the same time I knew he had given me the only chance to come back, and I couldn't waste it. I kept walking, not knowing where I was, without money, without documents, just with my torn clothes and the smell of war stuck to my skin. But inside my chest, a spark still burned. I was alive, and alive. I could try to get back to my daughter. I never imagined freedom could hurt so much. On this side of the border I was free, but free for what? Free to starve, free to get lost in a country that didn't speak my language, free to carry the guilt of having left Farid behind. My legs trembled as I walked along that dirt road, surrounded by dry fields. The cold wind cut my face like a knife. Each step was torture, but I forced myself to keep going. I had nowhere to turn back. I could only move forward. A village appeared on the horizon after hours of walking. It seemed small, with mud houses, goats grazing, children playing in the dust. As I approached, the people looked at me as if I were a demon. My clothes were torn, my face covered in dried blood, the glazed look of someone who had seen hell. An old woman came out of the door, a veil covering half her face. "Where are you from?" he asked in a thick, suspicious accent. "On the other side," I replied, without the strength to make excuses. She sighed, examining me as if assessing my worth. Then she motioned for me to enter. The house was simple, with dirt floors, but it smelled of freshly baked bread. The aroma almost made me cry. I hadn't smelled food in days. She offered me water, then brought me a piece of stale bread. I accepted it like someone receiving a banquet, chewing slowly, thanking for each crumb. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" I nodded, shame burning inside me. "I don't want to kill anyone else," I said almost in a whisper. She didn't answer. She just looked at me with pity, like someone who had seen broken men before. He let me sleep in a corner, on an old rug. I fell asleep so quickly that I didn't even notice the sun setting. I woke up in the middle of the night, screaming. Nightmares attacked me without mercy. I saw Farid, I saw Ali, I saw Reza, everyone blaming me, everyone bleeding in front of me. I curled up, hugging my legs, crying like a child. The woman appeared in the doorway, holding a lamp. "Everything is fine," he muttered. I wanted to believe, but how could everything be okay if my soul was torn apart? The next day she offered me clean clothes and some more bread. She said there was a road a few miles away where truckers sometimes gave rides to people who paid. I didn't have a cent, but she shook her head. They might take you anyway if they tell your story. I thanked her, squeezing her hand gratefully. She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a sad smile of someone who knew I still carried a weight much greater than hunger. I began to walk. The sun was beating down hard now, beating down on my face, cracking my lips. Every step hurt. My wounds were festering again, and the fever was taking me down. But I didn't stop. I arrived at the road in the late afternoon. Trucks were driving by, raising dust, honking loudly, engines groaning. Some drivers didn't even look at me. Others made obscene gestures, laughing. I must have looked like a mangy dog on the shoulder of the road. Just when I was thinking about giving up, an old truck, painted blue, stopped next to me. The driver opened the window, looking at me. "Where are you going?" "Any place away from war," to answer. He scratched his beard, thought for a few seconds, and signaled for me to come up. The passenger seat stank of diesel fuel and sweat. I didn't care. It was the smell of life, of movement, of chance. Better than the smell of death that permeated my uniform. The driver didn't say much. He just said he would drop me off near a big city where I could seek help. I thanked him. I stared out the window, watching the landscape pass by like a hazy dream. Burnt crops, abandoned houses, people wandering aimlessly. There, I realized that war doesn't just destroy soldiers, it ruins everything. It tears up the roots of families, devours entire cities, and spits despair for miles. When we arrived at our destination, it was already night. The driver pointed out a busy street, full of stalls selling food, children running around, people laughing. It seemed like another planet after everything I'd experienced. "You will survive, soldier," he said before leaving. I didn't answer, because surviving wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to live. I walked aimlessly through the streets, observing the lights, the noise of conversations, the smell of spices. Everything was so alive, so normal, that it hurt even more. I felt like a ghost among the living. I asked some men if they knew of any place where I could work. No one wanted to know about ex-soldiers, especially foreigners. I heard no after no, until a man pointed out a warehouse at the end of the street, saying that they sometimes hired porters. I went there. I asked for a job, anything, and the owner looked at me suspiciously. "You don't look strong enough," he spoke. "I can handle it," I insisted, showing my calloused hands. He sighed and let me stand, carrying heavy sacks of grain. With each weight I lifted, my shoulder screamed in pain, but I couldn't stop. I had to make some money. I had to keep going, because one day, somehow, I still wanted to go home to my daughter, go home whole, or as whole as was left of me. And as I was stacking bags, I felt something different. A small flame reigniting in my chest, the same flame that had been telling me since the first shot that I was not born to kill, but to protect. Maybe there, in the middle of that strange land, I could start to be human again. The weeks in the warehouse were both a torment and a miracle. Carrying sacks of grain kept me alive, distracted me from the ghosts that appeared every night. I slept on the floor in a dark corner, wrapped in cardboard, and still it was better than the mud in the trench. The store owner paid me little, but it was money, and money at that moment was synonymous with hope. I counted every coin as if I were counting my life. Every penny was one more step toward my daughter. At the end of the day, I would sometimes stand still and look at the horizon. I would try to imagine the road back, the borders, the dangers, and I would wonder if I would ever have the courage to cross all that again. Fear consumed me, but longing pushed me forward. The voices of my dead comrades would not leave me alone. Farid's face would appear in my dreams, bleeding, calling me a coward. Ali would accuse me of abandonment. I would wake up panting, drenched in sweat, not knowing if it was tears or fever. One day, while carrying bags, I overheard two men talking about refugees who were returning to Iran in groups, crossing illegally, trying to start over. That woke me up. I went up to them and asked for directions. The older man looked at me suspiciously, but eventually explained that some guides were doing the journey, for money, of course, and that there was a risk of execution if they were caught. I took a deep breath. The word execution, it chilled me to the core. But the image of my daughter smiling made me decide. I couldn't live forever as a ghost. I had to go back. I spent the next few days saving every penny. I stopped eating to save more. My body became so thin that my bones showed through my skin, but I didn't care. Hunger was already an old companion. When I thought I had had enough, I looked for that guide. A scowling man with a long beard and a hard gaze like stone. He examined me from head to toe, saw my torn uniform hidden under my civilian shirt, and asked no questions. "Advance payment," he said. I handed over every coin. My heart raced when the purse was empty, as if I had just bet my soul. The next morning, I left with him and 5 other men. We were all ghosts of war, each with his own rotten story, each carrying memories that hurt more than bullets. We walked for days, crossing minefields and avoiding border posts. We slept in the middle of the forest, exposed to the cold, the animals and the fear. The guide said almost nothing, he just pointed the way with his hand. One night we heard gunshots in the distance. The entire group fell to the ground, shaking like children. I closed my eyes and prayed to Allah to let me reach my daughter alive. If I was going to die, I would do so after seeing her one more time. When dawn broke, we kept walking. My feet hurt so much they bled, and each step felt like stepping on glass. I limped along, dragging my leg, but I didn't stop. "Continue," I repeated in my mind, like a mantra. When we got close to the border, the guide stopped and signaled for us to get down. "Down there," pointed out a patrol. "If they see us, they'll shoot to kill." My stomach turned to ice. I looked in his direction. Soldiers with rifles, sniffer dogs, eyes trained to hunt for any movement. "And now?" someone asked. "Wait for it to get dark," the guide said. We waited, eternal hours. I felt every beat of my heart echo in my chest. I thought about my wife, my daughter, the smell of the house, the carpet in the living room, any detail that reminded me of who I was before the uniform. When the sun went down, we crawled to a ditch, and from there we crossed it. The noise of the bushes seemed so loud that it almost deafened me. I was sure we would be caught, but the guards didn't notice anything. I crossed that invisible line that separated me from the hell before, to enter another hell, but one that, at least, was mine. I fell to my knees on the other side. I kissed the dry earth. I cried like a child, feeling like I was part of something again, the soil that I once wanted to leave, but that was still my home. The guide pulled me by the arm. "It's not over yet. Let's go." We walked for 2 more days until we reached a village destroyed by war. There he left us, saying that from there each of us would go on alone. I looked at the ruins, at the bullet-riddled walls, at the children begging for money, and I felt the weight of war crushing me again. But I wasn't going to give up, not now. I asked an old man where the road to my hometown was. He pointed suspiciously but said nothing. I followed, my heart heavy, praying to find my family alive. Every step on that road was a plunge into the unknown. I didn't know if my home still existed, if my wife would forgive me, if my daughter would remember me. But I had to try, because living on the run was like dying every day. Going back was dangerous, almost suicidal, but it was the only chance I had of being a father again. At the end of that day, as I watched the sunset paint the mountains red, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I was going to get home, or die trying.